Good evening. We start a 2-hour broadcast tonight with some breaking news. A cabinet official who recently told the Washington Post he didn't have control over the, quote, tone, the message, the public face, and approach, unquote, of his department has announced his departure. The Department of Homeland Security Chief Kevin McAleenan is out. It occurs the same day a judge said that the administration could not use military funding to build the border wall. Here with more tonight is CNN's Caitlin Collins. So what do we know about his departure?
Well, Anderson, this is sudden, with the president just now tweeting it, announcing the news himself. But of course, if you talk to people here in the White House, they saw this coming for a very long time. Ever since Kevin McAleenan first got named to this job under, of course, an acting position, people never envisioned him taking the job in a permanent role. And he was often someone who was at odds with the president and some of his top advisors, including Stephen Miller, Ken Cuccinelli, and their roles and where they wanted to go on immigration. Now, there were times where the president was pleased with what Kevin McAleenan was doing. There were other times where the president would lash out and blame him for the border policies, the high border crossings. But something else that's interesting that happened in recent weeks, Kevin McAleenan gave this interview to the Washington Post, Anderson, where he talked about how essentially he lamented the fact that he didn't feel he had control over the tone, the policy at the department at a time when he said they felt like they were in very polarized times. We're told that that interview, Kevin McAleenan didn't understand that he was on the record based on what someone close to McAleenan later told CNN. And essentially, he thought that interview was going to land a little bit harder in the West Wing than it did. And of course, it came at this time where this impeachment inquiry against the president was ramping up. So there was a bit of a distraction. But then, of course, now the president tonight announcing that he's leaving to go spend more time with his friends and family. He's going to announce a replacement for McAleenan, he says, next week.
So, I mean, it not surprising to a lot of people who knew him and knew the situation, but is there reason to believe this was a sudden decision? And was it a decision, do we know, on McAleenan's part or on the president's part?
It appears, based on what our sources are telling us right now, that this was McAleenan's decision, that essentially he had been kind of despondent, was the word that someone used to me over the last few weeks. Ever since that interview came out, people at the department who spoke with him said they had noticed a change in his attitude since that interview came out. An interview he said, again, he didn't know was on the record. But of course, Anderson, we should note he's had a really troubled time in this job. There was one time, based on CNN reporting, that he came close to resigning over the summer because he didn't feel like he ever had control over the department, over his subordinates. And that was at a time when you notice there was that purge of DHS officials after Kirstjen Nielsen left that continued throughout the summer. And essentially what we were told, McAleenan didn't feel like he had a lot of control over that. He thought that people like Stephen Miller had too much say in exactly who it was that was doing what at the Department of Homeland Security. The big picture here, though, for people at home is that the Department of Homeland Security has essentially been in a point of turmoil for some time now. They've had a complete rotation in not only the DHS leadership, but also CBP, other positions in DHS, under that umbrella of DHS. Depending on who the president picks next, that'll be a big question, because the people he's liked in the past, Senate Republicans have said, are people who do not have a chance of getting confirmed.
Caitlin Collins, thanks very much. Nick Miroff covers immigration for the Washington Post, interviewed McAleenan for that story 10 days ago, joins us now. Thanks so much for being with us. First of all, were you surprised to hear of McAleenan's leaving? And do you know any more details about, for sure, was it his decision?
Yes, I think this was his decision. I mean, I got signs of that when I spoke to him, and I got the impression that this has been coming for a while, particularly as he's felt more frustrated and somewhat isolated in his role there as acting secretary. He's been acting secretary now for 6 months. He's done everything that the administration and the president has asked of him, and delivered on the one thing that has mattered most to Trump, which is driving down the border numbers and kind of getting the crisis under control. But at the same time, the messaging coming out of the administration, the rhetoric on enforcement was in many ways at odds with his more kind of moderate approach to this stuff and the kind of language that he's more comfortable with.
It is remarkable when you kind of step back and look at all the people who, whose job was to execute the policy that President Trump has been pushing, along with Stephen Miller and others. The people who are actually on the ground having to kind of execute it, they end up leaving. And I don't know, I guess that says something about the policy itself at a certain point.
I mean, this is an incredibly difficult job. And I can tell you that he's been going nonstop, ever since he's got this. I can't remember ever, seeing somebody working quite that hard and facing, so many different difficult challenges. I mean, he was the commissioner of Customs and Border Protection before this, and he was obviously dealing with things like, the deaths of those children in custody, all the, criticism that he's faced, really from especially from Democrats, but also from the hardliners around the president who, doubted his, his kind of credentials and continue to whisper to the president that he was an Obama guy and wasn't really tough enough. But over the past 6 months, we've seen him implement some pretty contentious policies that have, in fact, really tightened things up at the border.